Hello, I'm Charles Moffat, and it's a beautiful but chill autumn day, and it is book review time again. So, what I have here is The Warlock in Spite of Himself by Christopher Stasheff, which was published back in 1969, if I recall correctly, and is part of a series of these Warlock stories that came out, during the 70s and early 80s and so forth. Okay. I read some of these books back in the 90s, the 1990s, and back when I was a teenager. And I remember enjoying them. I remember them being quite funny. And I couldn't remember some of the plots though. So I decided recently to reread them and buy some of the ones that I was missing that I didn't have and read those as well. Because I did not have all of them, obviously. The ones that I had back when I was a teenager, I had sort of inherited them from my cousin, who was also into fantasy books. He just gave us like a whole bunch of boxes full of fantasy books, and I ended up reading quite a few of them back at that time. Now, little thing about this is effectively science fantasy, or sci-fi fantasy, however you want to think about it. So it's got robot horses in it. It's got like a rocket ship. It's got fantasy stuff going on at the same time. Some of the stuff is explained as being not so much magic as it is like psionics or psychic abilities, or as they put in here, espers, as in ESP-ers. But some of the abilities at the same time that they do, like teleportation, doesn't really feel like it's a psychic ability, okay? And sort of other things that like definitely look more like magic. And there's also other things going on there as well. But here's the thing. I'm going to explain some of the things I didn't like about this book and some of the things I did, okay? Number one, I like the horse. The horse is one of the best characters. Who doesn't want a talking robot horse? But I am going to talk about roughly the first, I would say 150 pages of this book. Has a lot of exposition. So exposition is when you're describing things and telling the background stuff about the world and all this sort of stuff. And that was a pretty popular thing to do back in the 1950s and 60s, where a good chunk of the front of the book would be exposition. And it took a while to get in it. It slows you down when you're reading a lot of exposition. It gets really boring. And that was the style back then, that you would have lots of exposition in the front of the book. And to some extent it is needed, but other times it's too much. You don't need that much exposition necessarily. So a lot of writers these days have a tendency to slow drip it, okay, which is what I prefer. So you slow drip the exposition one piece at a time over the length of the book, and you basically filling in the blanks slowly. Whereas back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, they would kind of just give you a whole explosion of exposition at the very start of the book, which unfortunately was very boring. And you ran into the danger of just boring the poor reader with all of it. If somebody was to write a book similar to this today, they probably would try to slow drip it, so it's not everything all at once. So the first, I'd say 150 pages of this is a hard slog to get through. But once you get past that, the rest of it is a joy to read. Okay, because there's basically almost no exposition anymore after that point. And everything else that is in there is necessary, and you're getting a good chunk of the action, a good chunk of the really good dialogue comes later in the book. So if you were reading this book and you only read the first 50 pages and you got bored, I would understand. But it's one of those books where you have to be patient because it was written back in that time period. Now, Do I enjoy these books? Yes, of course I do. It's like you don't actually see the rocket ship really much. It's really the horse and various other items that the main character, Rodney, has. And there's, there's elves, there's witches, there's ghosts. Now, the ghost thing, you can't really explain that with, like, psychic powers or anything like that. The elves is explained a bit. Yeah. So it does kind of feel like, yes, there is magic. It is definitely magic. But at the same time, it's kind of like explained through the lens of science. Assuming that you can think of psychic abilities as being scientific. But yeah, but that was the thing back in the 1950s and 60s, that they would have a lot of these books that like sort of blended the ideas of psychic powers with magic at the same time. It's what you get when you look at Star Wars. Star Wars, when you think of Jedi using the Force, that's really just magic. But it's explained as being more like psychic abilities. So like, oh, you have psychic abilities, and therefore you're like a psychic warrior. That's a Jedi, or a Sith Lord, whichever. And it's, that I would say was the trend at the time. You don't find a lot of books going in that direction these days. A lot of them either go for like hard magic or soft magic, and they don't really go into the whole idea like, oh, magic is psychic powers. They just don't bother to do that anymore. But if you want to read an older series of books and you don't mind the exposition at the front of the book, that first 150 pages or so, yeah, this is a good one to choose because it is quite enjoyable. And I do like various characters aside from, just Rodney and the horse, obviously. There's another character called Brom, who I quite enjoy, who is, I'm not going to say. That's a bit of a spoiler there, so I'm not going to say exactly what Brom is, but I do like Brom as a character. Yeah. Brom O'Baron. When you say it like that, it sounds like he's like a lord. There you go. Yeah, Brom O'Baron. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's enough for now. Please enjoy some of Christopher Stafford's work. And if you're, looking for something that's a bit more modern, go check out my work, Charles Moffat. You can find me on Amazon.com /author /Moffat. Okay? Bye-bye.